Good morning, everybody. Okay, everyone, we're going to get started. Welcome to Setting Fee Structures, Balancing Risk, Trends, and Project Characteristics to Align Value with Your Services. My name is Bryce. I'm here to introduce Will Swearingen with the Zweig Group. They are going to be presenting a very excellent presentation today on the state of fees nationwide, as well as other things. I'll let Will give us more information. To tell you a little bit about Will, our presenter today, he is the principal of the Zweig Group, where he leads the firm's ownership transition consulting division. With over a decade of experience, Will was a recognized subject matter expert in ownership transitions, planning, and execution. His unique expertise lies in the profound ability to leverage comprehensive industry data from the Zweig Group, encompassing valuation, operations, profitability metrics, employee sentiments, and more to inform and optimize transition strategies. Will's extensive tenure at the Zweig Group has ingrained him with a deep understanding of industry trends and insights. Leveraging this valuable depth of knowledge, Will works with management teams across the U.S. to develop ownership transition plans that range from straightforward one-on-one transactions to intricate projects requiring sophisticated modeling and stakeholder education. He ensures that his clients are equipped with the critical data necessary to lead successful firms. From creating benchmarking tools to designing compensation programs for transition planning, Will builds invaluable resources for decision makers. Beyond his consulting work, Will is sought after for public speaking and a thought leader on topics such as ownership transition, fees and billing trends, and mergers and acquisitions within the AEC industry. Coming from a lineage of architects, Will possesses an unparalleled passion for the AEC industry. Will's dedication to the AEC industry and his ability to translate complex data into actionable strategies makes him an invaluable resource for firm owners navigating the complexities of ownership transition. Now, we do have to go through a slight disclaimer here because we are going to be talking about fees today. So I do have to read this verbatim, so please bear with me for a moment. This program is registered with the AIA CES for continuing professional education. As such, it does not include content that may be deemed or construed to constitute approval, sponsorship, or endorsement by the AIA of any method, product, service, enterprise, or organization. The statements expressed by speakers, panelists, and other participants reflect their own views and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of the American Institute of Architects, the AIA, or its components, or those of their respective officers, directors, members, employees, or other organizations, groups, or individuals associated with them. Questions related to specific products or services may be addressed at the conclusion of this presentation. So I'm going to repeat that, guys. Any questions you have today, let's hold them to the end because we have a lot of data we want to share with you. And in specific to fees, we just want to note that the fees portion of this session is intended to educate attendees about methods for establishing fees for projects and exploring different types of contracts suitable for various projects. All attendees should make independent decisions on a case-by-case basis on the fees and structures they will use. Attendees should not discuss their fees amongst each other or in other forums and convenings, specifics around their fees or their fee structures. Nothing discussed during this program creates or is intended to create an agreement with the AIA or firm strategies around its fees, including actual fees and prices a firm will charge, discussion or alignment, or the fee structures that any given firm may use. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Will.
All right, good morning, Bryce. That was the nicest introduction I think anybody's ever put forth about me, so I appreciate that. Appreciate Wendy Johnson, appreciate the AIA of Florida for having Zweig Group here. If any of you all aren't familiar with Zweig Group, I'll do a quick little introduction. The business started in Boston, Massachusetts about 37 years ago. Mark Zweig founded the company as a management consultancy and research agency that focuses specifically on the architecture and engineering industry. So we've been in business. We just celebrated our 37th birthday. it's a very focused niche sort of consulting that we do, and it's very, very focused on your companies. We don't go outside of this particular industry. So all of the data, all the stories, all the work that we do is with companies just like yours, and so do want to inform the conversation today from that particular perspective. We're going to hop into the learning objectives, and I do have to do a quick sort of public shaming of the group here. We sent out a survey about 15 times. There's some very specific learning objectives here about Florida-specific data. I think we only got like 11 people to participate. There will be an opportunity to re-click through the QR code so you can participate. It's super quick. It's about a 7-minute survey. So some of the information we're going to present today is really focused on national level data, and then also just some sort of best practices as it relates to setting fees and thinking through how you approach particular project types. So, as we're moving through this, we do want to look at different influences and trends in Florida and in the Southeast region. You guys certainly are in a unique market as it relates to the sort of the national picture. We're going to look at how you might change your particular approach as you think through what are some of the demands and outside pressures that are going to be influencing your particular market. From a risk perspective, we're looking at that through the lens of profitability, because you all are business owners, you're practitioners, you have employees. It's imperative that you generate profit through your business, and so we want to take a look at how you can ensure that you're generating profitability to the best of your ability through your fee structures. And then, we're just going to kind of look at some different ways in which you can sort of calculate from a top-down and a bottom-up perspective when you're looking at it. So just sort of zooming back out, we're going to talk about some national and some regional trends as it relates to what's happening in the market. I don't know, how many people have a firm that has over 25 employees? Okay, so a decent group. Most of you all are less than 25, 10 to 15. There's a lot of very small firms in the audience. It's a relatively fragmented space. But what's happening out there is there's a significant amount of consolidation, both from your peer strategic companies, we call them strategic and financial buyers. There's a lot of outside capital that's very interested in the design industry, both on the architecture side, certainly on the engineering side. We'll talk a little bit about what's happening there. Apparently, I missed the previous presentation, but there were some provocative comments about AI and some of the trends or the future implications of what's happening with technology. So there's significant disruption from technology, and your clients, your customers, the owners are starting to think through how they can access the solutions that you might be delivering from their perspective in a different light. So I think really looking through where technology and the customer are sort of predicting the future for your deliverable is important. Vertical integration within these private equity investments is also something that sort of shifts the value proposition from what you're delivering, which is drawings. You're delivering designs to build a structure, but there's so much more behind that. Simone's presentation yesterday really looked at that from a number of different perspectives, but thinking through the value proposition and what it is you're delivering, and not just in the context of what it is to you, but what's the value to the customer, bigger picture, longer term. So again, the company's been around for a long time. We collect a ton of data via our financial performance survey. That's where this data set comes from. This is just the architecture segment. This is 2 decades worth of data. You can see that over the last 20 or so years, 15% profit margins have been kind of a benchmark that we've sort of used as a barometer for profitability or success within that metric. You can see COVID really impacted the industry, took a significant dip. This last year, average architecture profitability was just north of 20%. So when you look at the market, again, Zweig Group does a lot of ownership transition from a mergers and acquisitions perspective. We monitor the market to really understand what's going on. Over the last 3 years, Florida has been the top market for acquisition activity. So when you think about what that means for your business, there's a lot of different things to consider because there's a lot of bigger national brands that are coming in to Florida to play in this particular, the Sunshine State. You can sort of just look at the other markets, Texas, California, Pennsylvania, New York, pretty typical hotspots for this activity. But what it does mean for you all is there's going to be new players, there's going to be new pressures, and there's going to be opportunities for you, certainly when you think about the transition activity that needs to happen. This is just a chart tracking the types of buyers that are coming in, well, really into the industry holistically. But basically what we're showing here is that over 50% of transactions in the space have been led by a private equity investment or a firm that has a private equity investment in the back of it. We really won't talk a ton about what that means here. We have a presentation tomorrow afternoon at about 1 o'clock where we're going to dig into this particular discussion in more detail. But again, just want to paint some perspective as to sort of what's going on at the national level and starting to think through how this impacts this particular discussion. We've been coordinating with Bryce and the AIA team over the last few months, and a comment that Bryce made that I thought was funny was that Florida has historically always paid in sunshine. And so we wanted to sort of take a look at, from a compensation perspective, what's been happening. We also have perhaps one of the most comprehensive salary databases in the industry. You can see some of that data on display out in the foyer. But we did look at sort of nationally what's been happening over the last 12 months in the architecture space. We looked at Florida specifically. We saw a year-over-year increase of about 4.5% across all sort of roles within the architecture grouping versus national. Now, going back to where the demand for acquisitions has historically been, you can see that Florida is a hot spot. There's been some pretty choppy performance across the U.S. Certainly when you look at what's happened with the political cycle, interest rates, coming out of COVID, multifamily got hit super hard if you were super exposed to that in specific markets, maybe not so much in Florida. Hospitality and retail also relatively impacted. So across the nation, we didn't see significant increases in base salaries, but again, here in Florida, we saw a nice little bump. When you look across engineering, environmental sectors, the national average was about 6% last year. We broke that down, excuse me, into looking at young professionals because these are the future of the industry. These are the people that you want to retain. This is the bright minds, the energy that this industry is going to require on a forward-looking basis. And so this was a group of professionals with 5 or less years in the profession. We saw increases in Florida of almost 7% for this group. Across the national sort of landscape, just 2.2% increase. I put this out there because this is a fundamental aspect of fee setting, and it has to be understood in the context of how your cost structure at your company is comprised. So I talked a little bit about private equity, what they're doing to the transition environment, but inside of the businesses that they're acquiring, there's fundamental shifts in how the structure of the company is conducted. So likely higher degree of standardization and specificity in how fees get put together. We are hearing that they are still leaving it up to the market leaders, the client-facing professionals that really have the relationships and understand what's going on in the market, because we're going to make some broad statements here, understanding this is a very nuanced, very individual, relationship-based sort of topic, but there are approaches and standardization within the operating environment in your company that the private equity and the more sophisticated companies are going to be pushing through, all in the pursuit of pushing profit out the back end of the company, right? And again, this is very, very important to you all because profitability allows you to invest in your people, invest in your systems, invest in your growth, and invest in making your business as successful as it can be. Another thing that the larger companies are going to be doing is looking at cross-selling through different disciplines. Oftentimes, architects and engineers don't mix like super well. I don't know, is anybody in a full-service firm here? Okay, great. So we do have a couple people that can understand that dynamic, but I'm sure you understand it nonetheless. But cross-selling through is a big opportunity. You know, you guys are typically selling services for other professionals that represent about 30% of your total revenue stream. So when you think about what that market capture does to the financial performance of the company, it's a significant opportunity, and again, one that is increasingly in focus. What this does do is this puts pressure on smaller firms to compete at that level, both through a pricing sort of lens, but also through what does this mean for my employees? What's the experience that my company can produce to retain and develop top talent? So though we didn't get really market-specific data through our survey, did want to just sort of present some of the dynamics that we look at as it relates to how this state is sort of segmented. I'm not going to tell you anything that you all don't already know, but I just want to sort of break it down so we can start to think about the different approaches that different companies make in different market sectors, right? So we took a stab at kind of getting a percentage of the total construction spend in the state of Florida as it relates to market sectors. Not surprising, multifamily and single-family residential is the lion's share of the construction spend in the state, roughly 40%. You break that down into commercial, sort of hospitality, retail, about 20-25%. The bottom half of this sort of represents a segment that the bigs are very, very interested in, and this is where a lot of the focus and investments coming from outside the state, and that's in the healthcare, the education, and the other institutional markets. These are larger, more complex, higher fee opportunity projects, and this is where the focus from the outside is looking into the state of Florida. Now, there's distinct geographies within Florida, right? South Florida operates quite a bit differently from a political and regulatory perspective than Central and North Florida do. There's also different requirements as it relates to the sophistication of the design, both natural disaster type elements, the requirements on the structures, and the specificity within the design and the scope in which you're delivering the design is different within these different regions and or types of projects, right? So all that to say, there's a variability in the expectations from you as the architect to deliver within these different ecosystems. So just sort of thinking through how do you negotiate, how do you set different fee structures for different markets. Growing a business is something that at Zweig Group, we're sort of growth pushers to a degree. We really want companies to think about what does it look like to grow the organization. We're very value oriented in the way that we think about your businesses. There's a significant amount of equity value in your companies, which I don't know if it's fully understood, like what that looks like in the context of liquidating your asset and capitalizing on the value inside the company. But what that requires at times is a growth-oriented focus. Something I've talked with several people about is, we don't do any marketing. We just have repeat customers, and it just keeps happening. We don't need to invest in marketing. We don't need to go and pursue a different project type because we just have 5 people or 10 people, and the work just comes, right? That's great. That's good and well. But again, we're sort of focused on how can you improve the diversification in your services? How can you grow into new client types, new project types? And so it does require looking at What does a non-competitive direct selection sort of process look like, which is what you're comfortable with, versus going into something that's negotiated or quals-based type approach? So when you start to think about how you pursue a new project type or a new market, it may require a key hire to bring that qualifications-based portfolio into your company. It may require you to build a portfolio with, let's say you kind of want to start to step into healthcare. Maybe there's some senior living. Maybe there's some small, outpost type small medical facilities that you could start to sort of step into a particular market. It's a different thought process. It's a slightly different approach than just saying, hey, the phone rings, we pick it up, and we've got 8 employees, and we don't really want to move past that particular part of our firm's life cycle. But I'll tell you, there's opportunity to grow your businesses and think about what that looks like. So I just want to caveat this slide with, this is some data that we've pulled at the national level. There's, a lot of variability here, right? But this is just directionally sort of focusing where, from a percentage of construction cost, there's a potential premium that might be applied to a project type. Again, South Florida, really ripe for single-family luxury development, smaller projects, higher as a fee as a percentage of construction cost. Can be very lucrative, but again, not a very sort of transition or sustainably oriented project type if that's your focus. Getting into multifamily, not a super complex. There's a lot of liability in that particular project type, lower fee structure as a percentage of construction costs. You get down into education and healthcare, we start to see that sort of tick up a little bit. Bryce, I know that there's an alternate resource for some of the more institutional type work that people have access to.
So just to point out for everyone, when Will and I were working on and talking about this presentation, we made a conscious choice to put aside the DMS curve that we all use in this room for the Florida institutional projects for government, because that is its own separate ball of wax that would require its own 1-hour conversation just to even begin to scratch the surface of.
So again, just sort of putting some stuff into focus as we look at where there's opportunity. We've been working with AIA National over the last few years. Kermit Baker and his team have been working in conjunction with Zweig Group to develop some data sets. This particular data set, or this question, was basically asking the national audience, over the last 5 years, have you consistently reported 20% or greater profit margins? And if so, what is your predominant sort of market sector? I think the threshold was roughly 1/3 of revenue needed to be generated through a particular market sector. So of all the firms that National surveyed, only 14% reported consistently high profits over that time frame. When you break that 14% apart, again, kind of looking back at that previous slide of the percent of the construction cost, these are very much in a line with the percentages that our survey reported. So only 8% of companies that had multifamily as the predominant market sector that they were focused on reported consistently high profits over that time frame. Commercial and industrial, but you look into the institutional, which that sort of comprises both the group that Bryce was just talking about, but also education, higher education, healthcare is kind of lumped into that as well. So again, larger projects, longer duration, higher fee structures, higher fee opportunity, but it does require, to get into those markets, it requires growth and intentional focus on stepping into those markets. It doesn't just happen overnight. When you think about how fees are getting set, constructed, and conveyed to the client, this, again, was through AIA National. We wanted to understand what was the most profitable fee structure that people were using. We also mapped this back against risk in the project type or the fee structure. Not surprisingly, percentage of construction costs without a cap was the most profitable pricing structure. Looking at hourly rates without an agreed maximum came in next. You kind of stair-step that down. Price per square foot or fee per square foot was the lowest as it relates to people's responding that it's a profitable fee structure that they follow. All that to say, fee setting is a multifaceted, nuanced kind of practice. And so taking into consideration multiple inputs into your structure is the best way. And historical data is critical. So the better the data that you have to report inside of your firms, goes back to timesheets. How many people have like the best timesheet keeping system and the best compliance with timesheets? Who's got the best in here? Nobody. It's a crapshoot. But we got to get those timesheets in. We have to understand the data that's going in, and we have to be able to use it to make actionable sort of strategic decisions at the company level. Certainly, there's some owners in the room, and I know that is part of your focus. So we wanted to also look at this. We're very focused on looking at growth versus profit. Our data is typically segmented out by a number of different categories, but here we wanted to look at profitability. So this is completion fees by sort of the profit stack that we look at. And in this, we just sort of wanted to understand from where is the trend, where are firms capturing the most value for their services. You know, traditionally, we think there's more value earlier on in the design process that you can deliver, right? But really, where we started to see some discrepancies or significant differences between the groupings was that in the CD phase is with the bulk of the fee coming through construction documents, it provides an opportunity to improve the margin. And anytime you're getting into loading more fee or more of the cost structure into bidding, negotiation, and CA, those are typically areas where you can start to bleed out margin. And so the more you can push your value proposition upstream and or into the CD phase and not lean on bidding, negotiation, and the time spent in CA to capture margin. Just, again, sort of some directional things to think about as you're putting together fees and scopes for your services. Okay, so we've talked about our financial performance survey. We've talked about the salary survey. This particular segment here really comes from our fee and billing report that we produce. And so there's just some observations from that report that we wanted to present here. You know, we talked about salary increases, roughly 5% over the last year for the Florida market. Looking at how firms have modified their fee structure over the last 3 years, on average, we found roughly 16% was the increase over the 3-year time frame, about 5% per year. But we're really just treading water, right? And so I'm not sure how often people are increasing their fees. Is everybody doing it annually? Yes. Anybody doing it more frequently than annually? Anybody not do? Oh. How often? Okay. Okay, you're sort of reevaluating the market, taking a look at it. Okay, good. Yeah, there's, you know, I would say it's required that you take a look at your fee structures every 6 months and make adjustments at least every 12. I would not, it's certainly in this inflationary sort of stage that we're in, would not wait 2 years. We do have a segment of the sample that waits 2 years, and it's, you know, roughly 10 to 12% doing it only every 2 years, which we do not recommend. The next one sort of, it goes back to more complex projects, going towards the previous slides, looking at healthcare, institutional, higher ed type projects, that higher profit firms are engaging legal in contract review before it's getting sent out to the client. So some firms are bringing in in-house counsel to help mitigate risk and also just from a contract structure, really insulate the design firms from the issues or potential risk that are out there. But again, these firms that are doing this are reporting higher profitability than those that aren't. We also found that smaller firms are using retainers more often. Is anybody using retainers like you're going to? Okay, good. Yeah, nice. What's the tip? Anybody requesting more than 10,000 up front? 20,000? Couple? Okay, so maybe 10 to 20 is sort of the starting point there. Good. Yeah, it also, certainly when you're in the private development space, there's some risk when you're working with developers. I imagine everybody in here has been stiffed at least once in the last month, maybe. That's why we're here. That's why we're here. Yeah. Well, I don't know how to handle that. But I did have a client that they had an incredibly quick collection cycle. It was like 27 days, and I was like, Craig, how do you do it? And his wife, Jean Marie, was in the business, and she's pretty strong. And he was like, I just send Jean Marie out with a Louisville Slugger and the checks just show up. So I was like, okay, well, we'll put that out there for consideration. There's a lot of immediacy sometimes from clients, needy clients, and so firms, I think, should be looking at how do you charge a premium for rush work. And so we ask that. Only 21% of architecture firms were doing it versus roughly a third of your peers in the engineering and environmental sectors. So there is an opportunity for you guys to capture some additional margin when there is some additional pressure from your client for rushed work. Thinking through collections, cash flow is critical to the life of your business. And so one of the metrics or the indicators that we're always looking at when we're evaluating a business and its health is your average collection period. We're reporting two different numbers here. The 53 days is more, I would say, the typical rhythm of the business when you're starting to look at what's that collections period over the cycle of the year versus year-end financials. There's always a little bit of tax gaming, stashing of receipts and invoices and cash in the desk. Not that people do that, but so we do see the year-end financials produce a slightly higher number, roughly 75 days. And typically when we're analyzing a business, we're looking at year-end data. But this is important because your companies are expensive to run. Now, a 5-person firm is not as expensive as a 50-person firm, but nonetheless, you still have payroll, you still have sub-consultants, you still have obligations and costs that are incurred by the business that the quicker you can bring the money in the door, the more free cash flow you have to, again, invest back into people and back into the business to make it an attractive place to work. So this was another interesting sort of segment of the data. We asked, does your firm have different billing rates or multipliers that vary by market sector? We found that firms that do not reported higher profitability. So I think there's a number of things at play here. One, there's the administrative cost of trying to navigate multiple billing rates and multiples or multipliers in different markets, but you're also probably leaving margin on the table by saying this is a lower complexity sort of deliverable, we're going to reduce our fee. Just set the fee at the value that you deliver at the company level, whether you're doing some healthcare and that's your premium fee structure, and you've got a multifamily project as well. Try to level set those across the company so that you're working across all sectors with a common understanding of the value that you deliver. Okay, we're going to do a quick little educational moment on profit and loss statements here to start to, we're going to calculate these things from a few different perspectives. So this is just looking at the numbers at the aggregate level. This is a typical income statement, very, very consolidated, boiled down. This is an industry average, I think, from 2024, but Gross revenue is all the billings that go out the door from the firm. This comprises your subconsultants, your reimbursable expenses, which earlier we referenced represent, for most architecture firms, it's about 30%, could be more. Here, this is blended with engineering companies, so it's just 23-ish% of the total revenue that's passed through. We like to calculate things off of a net service revenue basis. That's the term that we use, which is gross revenue less subconsultants and reimbursable expenses. And then we get into the most direct costs to most direct to most indirect. And that's where you see that direct labor. You can see direct labor as a percentage of net service revenue is about 33%. So what is that labor multiplier? The effective net multiplier on direct labor, in this example, it's 3, right? 3 times 33 equals 100-ish. So that's one way to sort of look at what's the effective net multiplier that firms are achieving. Looking at it, this is sort of a top-level look here. But then you've got all these other costs that the business incurs, right? You look below that line, below the gross profit or the gross margin line, we've got additional costs incurred by the business. We've got indirect labor, marketing, HR, finance, the person that just sits there and doesn't do anything. We still pay them. Nobody's got those people, right? Everybody's working. Then you've got payroll-related expenses. You've got other general administrative costs. You've got copier leases, which is a complete racket. Has anybody gotten off their copier lease? You can't. You get locked into that and you're just stuck. It's amazing. We run into that quite frequently. But there's a lot of costs that are incurred at the business level that we have to bake into the fee structure that we charge the client. It's not just the person's hourly rate that we're working off of, right? There's an entire business that has to be supported through this model. And so looking at fee structures, project profitability, how we evaluate all of these things from a strategic perspective and monitoring our performance is how we start to optimize and get to structures that, on the other side, generate margin for the company. So here's just a different view of that same slide, basically simplifying it into some bar charts. We've got our gross revenue, less reimbursables, then we've got our direct labor bucket, then we have gross profit with all the indirect labor coming out, which drops out that nice little green nugget of net profit, which goes into your pockets, right? Wrong. Goes back into supporting your business, which everybody thinks it goes into your pocket, and for some of you it does, but again, these are expensive businesses to run, and communicating what that looks like to your people is something that we want to help you with. So, thinking through how we construct an hourly rate or a billing rate for an individual. There's a lot of words on this. You will get these slides as a result of this, so don't feel like you need to try to read all of it. But the billing rate has to take into account the direct labor costs associated with that person and their salary. Layer in the overhead cost that's associated with running the business, and develop a target profit margin that's acceptable to the company and or the project type. Some projects are implicitly 30 to 40% margin projects. Some aren't. They're 5 to 10%. Those are strategic decisions that you make on where you want to invest time and resources. Are we okay going into a new market and only getting 5 to 10% where we know we can crank 30 to 40% over here? Those are strategic decisions that you need to make at the leadership level. So you can look at this on a project by project and person by person basis. Here's just the calculation sort of explained. But let's just say someone makes $104,000 a year, good for them. Overhead rate at the company is about 1.5 or 150%. We've set a target profitability for the company of 17%. The way in which we start to construct that labor multiplier and the bill rate. This is, again, a different way to look at the calculation, but we're taking the 104, dividing it by 2080, which is a 40-hour work week. Everybody just works 40 hours, so we just do 40. Yeah. Yeah. But that's, so then we get to the $50 per hour, right? The overhead rate of 150 gets applied to the hourly rate, to that $50 per hour, and we get that $75 per hour to accommodate the overhead and the indirect costs associated with running the business. You get to that combined rate of 125. Now we got to bake in the margin that we want. So taking that a step further, we essentially reduce or we develop a profit multiplier using the 17%. That gets us down to the 0.83. 125 divided by 0.83 comes out with 150. Another way to do that is just to say our target effective net multiplier for our people is 3, so it's 50 times 3. So again, all these things are at play together, and don't just take one approach to setting a fee or setting a billing rate, but really analyze it from a number of different perspectives to understand, again, how you can optimize it within your business. Another example of this at play is this slide, where this is like subjective. So what's interesting to me about this particular slide is it indicates how a lack of succession planning and a lack of career pathing and developing structures to move people through your company to enhance their career impacts profitability. So those are two totally different concepts, again, that are at play on this slide. So you get companies, what we're looking at here is we're looking at the years of experience that a company sort of indicates that this person is a senior architect. We're going to promote them, give them a salary increase, and bill them out at a different rate. So for the higher profit groupings, that was only like 8.5 years was when that designation sort of got bestowed upon the senior architect. In the lower profit groupings, that was like 10 to 13 years before they elevated somebody to a senior architect. Conversely, I mean, you sort of multiply that with this effective net multiplier. In the very high profit groups, that was a 3.2 net multiplier versus a 2.8, 2.9 in the lower profit categories. So again, it just presents another case why sound business practices and understanding the growth objectives of your people and of your company and getting those in alignment can help you create better financial performance within your companies. So I think that's sort of the bulk of the presentation. I wanted to leave a few minutes here for conversation. I flew through it. I wasn't sure how much people would want to talk or not. There's a few talkers here. I don't know about in this session, but.
Okay, so if you have questions or comments, please raise your hand so I can bring the mic to you. Also, just to give a quick plug, if Will's slide 2 slides back about the multipliers seemed like a lot of data to download, there is also a companion presentation tomorrow at 10 a.m. that builds up from the ground up how to determine what your multiplier should be that we invite all of you to also join us for. So does anybody have any questions or comments they'd like? Coming over.
Hi, thanks for that presentation. My question is really about contracts. Do you have any data on what you just presented on the percentage of architects who are using the AIA contracts or client contracts or their own in-house created contracts?
Great question. I thought about adding that slide, which I should have. Then you wouldn't have had to ask that question, but I'm glad you asked it. I don't have it straight off the top of my head, but my gut says that it's north of 80% are using the standard AIA contract, with some developing slight modifications into that. We have that is actually reported in our fee and billing survey.
Thank you. You had talked about 30% pass-through. Was that excluding civil fees? That was just vertical construction?
So, yeah. Well, when that's reported to us, we're not sure which disciplines are getting passed through. In some instances, they may have civil in-house, they may have mechanical in-house, and so it's hard for us to like understand what's getting passed through. I will say, civil's a very profitable category, and so if you're looking at how you might grow your business or boost margin, if you can find a civil to come and play inside of your company, it can certainly boost your performance.
I have a question about the increase in salary in our state. Without having all the numbers on the national salaries in front of us, do you think that's a reflection of a little bit of a catch-up in salaries to be competitive nationwide, or a reflection of our market, or a little bit of both?
Great question. Also something I thought about trying to bring forward, but that we're doing it in Q&A, which is better. So to Bryce's point, I'm going to lean on his perception a little bit because he's here in the market more so than we are. And what we did see coming out of COVID was a significant surge across the nation in base comp increases. I don't know exactly what that looked like in Florida. This does feel like a little bit of catch-up, but it also feels like it's a little bit of recognition of the demand for the services in the state. So it's kind of hard to know if it's catch-up, but I would say that, again, coming out of COVID in 21, 22, and 23, we saw significant steps up across the country and didn't, for this presentation, go back and look and see how Florida tracked in that time frame, but it appears that it's meeting the market, or attempting to.
Good morning, thank you. This may be more of a contract negotiation issue, but beyond bidding and negotiations, the regulatory and permitting process becoming more and more extensive. Do you see that as being an outlined item? Because once you submit it to the regulatory agents, you're at their whim, and it seems to take more and more time every project.
You should talk to your attorney. No, I'm not sure exactly how to answer that. I will say we're seeing an uptick in environmental interest and activity in the environmental space as it relates to permitting, not necessarily just for vertical construction, but certainly as it relates to horizontal. When we're looking at infrastructure, it's a complex regulatory environment, and I'm sure in Florida there's quite a bit to consider. I'm not sure how much of that lands on the architect's plate to bring forward, or how, from your perspective, that has increased in complexity or frequency, but it sounds like it's of note. Yeah.
Actually, Will, can I get a show of hands question? I'm curious, how many people in this room are billing separately for the permitting process in Florida now? Yeah. Maybe it needs to be a separate line item.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Regarding the phases of projects and profitability and that sort of thing, is there a significant difference between traditional design, bid, build projects and CM projects in those numbers?
That's a good question, and I don't know how to answer that. I will say what we're seeing right now in the last 6 months is a significant increase in interest in CM firms, in owner's rep, construction management, project management firms from outside both outside the country, also outside the industry. That particular segment of the space is garnering a ton of interest. So I'm not sure if that plays into your question at all, but I know it's a very, very fragmented market. Design build is increasingly picking up pace. And so it's hard to know how that fee distribution looks inside of some of those different business models. But I will say there's a lot of interest from the capital providers in that space.
From your slides, it looked like obviously percentage of construction is the way to go to maintain significant profitability. Any advice on those of us in the state of Florida that are, I mean, a lot of my colleagues are doing just fixed fees, which is kind of on the lower level. And when we compare it to our friends in California or in Boston, and they're charging 12% of construction or 15% of construction in some cases, and I look at ours and we're at 2.5%, it kind of just destroys the mood a little bit. Any advice on how to transition from fixed fee over to a percentage of construction?
How good are your relationships with your clients? Pick the best one and start to sort of tweak the fee structure there. I mean, I think you've got to educate them, right, on what value you bring to the process. I mean, there's that component, but when you're talking about switching from a fixed fee and there's a significant price increase that's likely on the table, talking them through why, what that looks like. I mean, putting the why behind the activity is very, very helpful. I don't know how many people you have in your company, but when you start to think about what it costs to run a firm, and on a 2 or 3% of construction cost sort of basis, you can't be competitive. And it comes up quite frequently that the commoditization of the design process it's a self-fulfilling, not prophecy. So just be active to get out in front of it. We could probably talk more specifically about it, but I do think it's something that people need to be taking into account. It sounds like there was a pretty provocative conversation this morning about what AI is going to do to the design space and fees. So you certainly don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but I would incrementally do it and then work to find a way in which you can educate the customer or the client on the purpose or the why.
Okay.
Thanks. So if you do a percentage of construction cost and the client has a budget early on and you base your fee on that budget, construction cost comes in, they're significantly higher. How at that point do you adjust your fees to changing construction budget, I guess?
Yeah, great question. I would say that likely is going to come down to how that entire project budget got put together. If you were awarded the entire project, where you're billing out different segments, it's essentially a fixed fee at that point, where the project's been scoped, the fee's been set, and you're starting to bill incrementally into phases against that total number. As the project cost increases, finding the delineation points between SD, DD, and CD, and re-evaluating the contract as it relates to entering into a new segment of the contract is likely the place to start.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Angel Saki. I'm AI Miami's immediate past president, and when I had hair color like you guys, I came to an AI Florida convention like this here in Tampa, and I remember hearing a presentation similar to this one by a gentleman called Frank Stasiowski.
Oh, no.
Okay.
Not Frank!
And let me tell you something, there must be something about the air here in Tampa that brings all of us architects to talk about how to make more money. So I'd like to congratulate our Madam President and AI Florida, all their staff, Bryce and Will, for bringing this to the forefront again, because if we don't openly communicate to our clients that they're not paying us enough, we're not going to get out of this, and I'm a second generation here in Florida. The other thing is, if we don't communicate this to our other fellow architects that are not AIA members, we're simply preaching to the choir. We've got to get out and talk to those that are undercutting us, whether it's the private sector, commercial, or public sectors, and try to engage them to understand and ask them point blank, do you really think you're making more money than any of us, or do you not understand why you're not making any money? So I wanted to commend you all. There was a slide there that talked about percentages. The gentleman over there asked, how do you tell a client if you're accustomed to billing fixed rate?
Yeah.
You just communicate. If you don't ever ask for what you really want, you're never going to get it. So thank you very much, and I appreciate you guys here.
Thank you. Yeah, someone called it the art of the ask. You're not going to get it if you don't ask for it.
Thank you very much. That was a very good presentation. Since we are talking about percentages, I think you show in a slide where you're showing the distribution of fee during the different phases. Is it possible you can bring that slide to the screen? Great, yes. Have you seen any change on that percentages per phases based on the effort that you apply to the construction of modeling in Revit? By the time that you get to the design development, you have your building completely designed with all the families and all that. Documentation now is going to be just exactly like that, just to document what is already implemented in the model. Any change on that? Just to load a little bit more to the schematic design and design development, and no way until you have the construction documents just to charge. And I see 35%, and in the past it was like a 40%, but I don't know if that change is reflecting that kind of effort that you have to.
We don't have that level of data, but I would say one thing that comes up frequently is how you delineate and communicate the different phases and sort of modulate your deliverables out to the client to kind of create distinct cuts between when this phase and that phase is complete. It sounds like there's a lot of variability in how that happens within companies. And so I don't have an answer to your particular question, but again, I think the more value you can convey upstream in the design process and the more that comes through in the delivery, that's the objective.
Thank you.
Okay, everybody, unfortunately, that is time for us. If anyone would like a copy of this, it's going to be available after the conference is over. And also, thank you, everyone, for the questions, because it looks like we have a lot of follow-up for Will.